All right, what's up, you guys? Welcome back to the PMR podcast. I'm Andrew, and I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict.
What's up? My name is Mitch. I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict, and welcome back to the PMR podcast. This is episode 11. We were bringing on our second guest. She was a Denison alum as well. She has a master's in mental health counseling and behavioral medicine. She also ran cross country and track at Denison, and currently she's the lead clinician at the Addiction Treatment Center of New England. And her license is a licensed mental health counselor. Emily, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're excited to have you here too. We'll just get right into it.
This is going to be an awesome episode for everyone listening. I love how we're having guests now. We started strong with Greg. That was terrific. And, you know, we hope to keep kind of organically having guests. Like the way this happened was really pretty cool, the way that we're kind of all connected, and we can get into more of that. But yeah, Mitch and I were talking before we started, and I think this is a great idea Mitch had is really kind of asking the same question of all of our guests to start. So Emily, I'm going to start you off with something that we didn't really tell you we were going to ask you, but what comes to mind? What's the first thing that you think about when you think of an alcoholic or an addict? What does that bring to mind?
It's a good question. And I think my answer 3 years ago would have been really different than it is today. I think initially, and as I'm sure we'll get into, have had my own experience growing up with someone in addiction and sort of what that brought into my life, which was a lot of negative. And so I think that was a lot of sort of what initially started forming my mindset around addiction. And asking me now, some of the most beautiful, kind, loving people that I know and work with are people who are either in active addiction or in recovery. And so it's been fascinating to kind of have multiple different lenses that I've looked at addiction with. And yeah, I think, there was my mindset before. And when you initially asked me the question, all I could think of was like beautiful people. I think I've been able to see the sides of people in addiction that they don't show other people. And that's like a real privilege to me. It's challenging because I try to get them to see that in themselves. But that was my first thought, was really beautiful people.
And that's, I think part of what we're doing here is, in making this podcast, is trying to change people's ideas of addiction, right? Because as people have told me, and as I've grown up in school and the DARE program and whatever, like we have this idea is like the addict or the alcoholic is the guy in the mugshot who's disheveled, or the dude living under the bridge, like drinking whiskey out of a paper bag, like all of these really very, very negative images. And to hear that, somebody working in the field too has developed this type of idea. And dare I say, like a massive change in perspective is an amazing, amazing thing. I guess, for us and for the listeners too, just to give us some background into what you do and where you come from and how you got into this work, that would be awesome.
Yeah, sure. So when I was thinking about this question before coming on here, it actually gave me the opportunity to do a little bit of reflection that I don't often do. And what I found interesting is that getting into the field in general and then getting into the field of substance use treatment were two separate things for me. So more background, grew up in Virginia, ran in high school, grew up with divorced parents, a challenging childhood, but nothing, too out of the ordinary. When I was 16 is the first time that I realized that my dad had a substance use problem, which was the first time he went into rehab. So up until that point, I was really sheltered from it, which I'm really blessed for. But it did become a big part of my life, and a pretty negative part of my life. Went to Denison, ended up cutting off contact with him for a good number of years, up until he passed when I was a senior. So, I was able to sort of take a step back from having to think about addiction, having to think about substance use, and just sort of put that to the side for a little bit, but really started to think and want to get into the field of mental health treatment. I had my own experience with mental health and anxiety and depression, and also saw other people struggling with mental health, and always wanted people to feel like they could get better, because I did, like in going to therapy and in finding coping skills and all that good stuff. Like I always wanted other people to be able to find that. And so part of my journey was, my bachelor's is in psych, and I loved that, and I loved studying humans. But when of course my dog's gonna bark. When I went to grad school, it was
It's okay.
do this. When I went to grad school, I decided that I wanted to work in a school. I wanted to work with kids, something totally different from substance use. But the way that my program was structured was there were 2 different clinical placements that we got to do. One was for a semester, one was for a year. And so the one that was for a semester, they said, pick something that terrifies you. And the one that's for a year, pick something that you think you might want to do. So naturally, for the semester, I did my practicum in a detox. And so one day I was in a detox, one day I was in the intensive outpatient program. So fully immersed in people in day 1 of recovery. And I fell in love with it. It was terrifying. It was scary. It was new. Being a young female in that placement too was a large learning opportunity. But I fell in love with it. Took another break, did my internship in a school, loved that, but ended up, really learning so much about this other side of addiction that I'd never experienced in my own life that I had to go back to it. And so that's why I ended up getting the job I'm at now, which is at a methadone clinic. And yeah, it's fun to think about sort of how it all happened, because it was never something that I expected.
That's pretty sweet that you got jumped in like that and went through all those in the beginning. Something you said when you started though about helping people in addiction find how beautiful they are themselves, or finding that self-love. I love that, because I feel like that's the only way for someone to truly want to get clean and sober, is if they begin to start that process of loving themselves. So that's awesome that you see that in them ahead of time, help them build into that. I do want to learn more about the methadone clinic though, and what all goes on there.
Yeah. Methadone is such a specific subset of substance abuse treatment. And I adore it. I think it's so important. I think that more people need to know about it. And I'm really glad that I can talk about it here and hopefully reach some people. But, a general structure of a methadone clinic is people are coming to get their methadone every single day. And a little bit of the science is methadone is an opiate agonist, which means it's fully binds to the receptor in your brain. It's a complete opiate. There's no, Suboxone is going to be different because it's only going to be partially binding. I'm not a doctor, but that's general, information about how it operates in the brain. What's really cool is that someone can get up to a stable dose on methadone and not have withdrawal symptoms, not have cravings, and be totally coherent and like can drive a car, can work a job, can raise children, and not have any sort of cognitive impairment at all. So there's a lot of benefits to it. There's also a lot of myths about it. A lot of people think, oh, it's liquid handcuffs. It's just another drug that I'm substituting. And starting at the methadone clinic, I didn't really know anything about methadone actually. And my supervisor told me when I asked him, like, how is it that this is not just an addiction to a different drug? And he said, for something to be an addiction, there has to be something unhealthy about it, and there have to be negative consequences. And methadone is not that way. There are people on our clinic who have been there since before I was born, and they continue to come get their dose, and they work jobs, and they have families, and there's no negative consequences to it. It's, in addition to that and helping people maintain sobriety, it's also a really important harm reduction technique. A lot of opiate users, obviously we hear about overdoses all the time. It's becoming way more common. And methadone is a huge overdose prevention technique. A way that I like to explain that is when someone goes into prison or jail, for example, and they've been an opiate user, they go through the withdrawal, they're not using anymore, their tolerance is totally decreased. They get out, if they use, they overdose. And that's like a story that we hear so often. When someone's on methadone, if they stop using, but they're maintained at their dose of methadone, if they were to go back and relapse, they're a lot less likely to overdose. So it saves a lot of lives.
How long are you saying? You say you have people coming for like years. How long do you sustain that dosage, and does it go up? Does it go down? How is that all decided?
Yeah. So when someone comes on the clinic, they start at 30 milligrams. And methadone's really dangerous, like 30 milligrams for me would be very dangerous. So it's so controlled. It's every 3 days, you meet with the doctor, you're assessed for your withdrawal symptoms. You can go up 5 to 10 milligrams. Then we observe you every day to see whether you're sedated. Clients are assessed by the nurses before they get their dose every single day. We are seeing people go to much higher doses right now because of the strength of fentanyl. It just, doses that people were on before aren't really cutting it. But once someone gets to a stable dose and they feel like they're not in withdrawal when they wake up in the morning and they're not experiencing the cravings that they were previously, ideally they should feel totally normal around the clock. So, I talk with my clients about, when you would wake up in the morning and you would have to get your fix because you're so sick, initially that's what it's going to be like to come and get your methadone. Like you're going to be coming to get your methadone because you're so sick, but eventually when you get up to a stable dose, you're going to feel totally normal around the clock, and it'll be like just taking your daily medication.
So we've spoken about this before too, and briefly, you have some clients, some patients who have been on for like many, many years. And so because I'm programmed a certain way, right? And I have unfortunately grown up with the myth that believing in the myth that it's just a substitution. Like we're just substituting one addiction for the other. And when I drive by or I, go by them, any of the methadone clinics that are in South Boston or wherever, it's hard for me to also be rid of that idea because of some of the like behavior, some of the like the people's states as they're, standing around almost like waiting,
Mhm.
can they get their dose, right? And so my question is like, what percentage do you think, and how like effective do you think it is as like a long-term almost solution to an opiate addiction? Like, do you see most of your clients come in and they're like, they'll go a few weeks here and then they might have a relapse, but because of the harm reduction, they don't die. And then they go with another couple months maybe, and then they might have another relapse, but they don't die. Or do you see more people come in and they're, they get on it and they might have a few slip ups initially, but then they get that stable dose and it's like smooth sailing. Like that's kind of where I'm not lost, but I'm almost wondering, like, when you say normal, like as an addict, I'll tell you, like, I rarely feel normal. Like I'm a fucking disaster. Like, so when you say normal, are we talking like these, like the craving, the physical craving? It's funny you say that. That's like big book jargon. But like the physical craving, is that like truly gone, or what? Like what? I need a little bit more of an explanation.
It's a good question. And part of the reason that you're not satisfied by an answer, and you're not going to be satisfied by an answer, is because it's different for everyone. When I say that you feel normal around the clock, I mean, you're not like getting sick and then feeling better and then getting sick and feeling better. You feel physically well the whole time, like you're not in pain again, and then you're taking something to not be in pain. It just is maintained in your system. There are people who come on the clinic and they increase their dose for 3 months, and then they decrease their dose for 3 months, and they're on 0 and they're done and they're good to go. That's a lot more rare. I think that's pretty quick for methadone to work. And when you're going up for such a short amount of time, you don't want to go as high on your dose, because methadone withdrawal is very painful. Methadone is a long-acting opiate, and so it's in your system for like 36 hours or something like that, and so it's a painful withdrawal. When people decide to decrease, we recommend, it depends on the person, but like, if you're on a really high dose, maybe you could drop 5 milligrams every couple weeks or something. But when you get down to a lower dose, it's like 1 milligram every 2 weeks, 1 milligram a week. Like you're going really, really slowly. And it's uncomfortable. That's not to say it can't be done. I have a client who just completely tapered off, and had sobriety, and, had his children with like a success story. But then there's the people who get on methadone. We saw actually during the pandemic, a lot of people who got on methadone because they couldn't find drugs as easily, and it kept them from getting sick. So if I can't find my drugs today, but I'm going to take my methadone, I'm still going to feel okay. Which I think is wonderful in that it's like humane. Like no one should feel sick, and then do something to, try and get the drugs that they couldn't get otherwise. And it's safer, I think. It also gets people in the door. And so the people, I'm thinking of one in particular who came in during the pandemic, had no intention of getting sober at all, and got a little bit of a taste of what that might be like and liked it. And now he's not using.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's cool. And the structure of the program being that you're getting your medication and you're seeing a counselor, because that's actually like a legal mandate that you have to be in therapy at the same time. There's, the physical cravings might dissipate with the methadone, but obviously there's still the psychological piece of addiction, and they get to work on that in therapy too. So it's kind of all encompassing. Does
Yeah,
that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah. And real quick too, I'd really love to hear more about like that requirement, right?
Mhm.
For therapy. Because that, I know for me, like that is a huge part of why I'm still sober, is that I have a therapist. I mean, I have AA. AA is huge, but I need a place where I can vent one on one with somebody who understands how the brain works, right? And as well as AA does in so many respects, it's not therapy. It's not. So I mean, so how does that work? So like a client will come in and they'll have like before they get their dose, they have to meet with you. Like could you
Yeah.
describe that a little bit more?
Yeah, so pre-COVID, and I didn't work there pre-COVID, but people were required to do 2 groups a week and 1 individual session a week. So they had their scheduled groups, they had their scheduled individual session. They were required to do that. The way we do it now, because we didn't run groups for a really long time and we're kind of slowly starting how to figure out how to roll that back out, clients have to meet with me twice a week. With a select few that have some long-term recovery only once. So there's the full range of people who are super motivated and want to meet with me more than twice a week and really dig in and get into the hard work. And there are people who I'm chasing around trying to find them. And those people, it's not a power that I like to have, but I understand the safety concern because methadone is so dangerous that if I don't see you for 2 weeks and I have no idea what's going on with you, how do we know that you're safe? You could be using way more than you used to. You could be, who knows? And so, I have the opportunity of holding someone's medication before and saying that they have to meet with me before they can get their medication. And like I said, not a power that I like to have, and it doesn't usually end very fun for me or them, but it's getting someone in the door. And maybe if I could get them in my office, then I can say, actually, like, no, come sit down, tell me what's going on. And, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but if you can try to get them in the door, then, it opens up a little bit of contemplation about talking to me.
Yeah. I'm so grateful that we have someone on that has like the direct, like in the battlefield type fucking experience, because I've always been fascinated and I've had varying opinions on, and I was not a heavy like opioid. I didn't use heroin or anything like that. So I don't have the direct experience to speak on, but I've always thought I always thought like the safe needle or the clean needle injection sites and methadone clinics and stuff like that, I never really knew how to fully feel about them. So I'm learning a lot just listening to you talking about that more, but
and you don't get it until, because like obviously I went to school for this, I had addiction courses and stuff like that, but you don't really get it, I think, until you're in it or you talk to someone in it, because like needle exchanges, for example, or methadone, like you said, like they save lives and people don't realize that. And, if we can give someone a clean needle, not us, but a needle exchange can give someone a clean needle and prevent them from getting HIV, like, wow. And, if someone can get their methadone dose in prison, and so when they get out and they decide to use again, they're not going to die. Let's save a life,
Yeah. And I think when I first heard about it, I had that knee-jerk reaction of that's enabling. You know what I mean? I'm not sure how many other people, maybe there's other people in recovery, or I mean, I know for sure there's people out of recovery that think that that's enabling. And so that's an interesting topic, because it does sound like it is like this is a plus minus game. You know what I mean? Addiction in general. So,
well, and I'll bring it back, and like, not to throw you on the spot, Andrew, but when I said something about, but I'm going to do it anyways. When I said something about not someone being able to get their methadone when they can't find drugs and so they're not sick. And I think that that's a luxury they should have because that's humane and they're human and they don't deserve to be in pain. And I saw a little bit of a reaction from you, and I get it. I get it a lot. And let's play out what happens when someone can't find their drugs. So maybe they rob someone and they get stabbed, and there's a million other things. And so if someone cannot be sick and not do something that they wouldn't normally do or that they wouldn't want to do, that's helpful.
It's as like, and this goes back to a conversation we had a few days ago too, but it's such like I have a million different emotions in my head when I'm hearing these things, right? Because number one, like I do have that enabling kind of thought bouncing around, because there's like this the cynic in me who's like, okay, well, so what are we doing here? Are we just making it safe for an addict to go out and use with knowing that he or she or they won't overdose, right? Like, and then there's the part of me too when I hear about the tapering process and how severe the withdrawal can be, right? Like the serious physical dependency that and correct me if I'm wrong, that seems to develop, right? And so I have all of these thoughts, right? And it's like negative. And then Mitch says, this is a plus minus game, right? Like, this is an ugly game. Like, this is addiction. Like, and when he said that, it was almost a light bulb moment for me, because like I could find a million ways to critique anything. And I do. That's what
we will.
And that's good. That's how you come to conclusions, and that's how we, learn from each other.
Right. And I could find, the sky could look at me funny and I'd say, I have a resentment against the sun. But what I'm saying is like, this is harm reduction. Like, this isn't the end in my, what I'm understanding in my own opinion is that this isn't like the end all be all solution to addiction, but this is a massively helpful tool for those of us who don't have maybe the resources to check into a treatment center, like, to go and whatever it may be. This provides opportunities for people who otherwise may not have like a good shot at sobriety simply because of their circumstances. Like, and when I get over that initial hump of like enabling, like, fuck it. It doesn't matter what, like, if we're enabling like the use of another opiate, like you said, an addiction is characterized by like negative behavior, like a mind altering substance. And this is simply not that. Like, this is not an addictive. It's a substance that develops physical dependency, but it's not an addiction in that traditional sense, right? And so I almost have to get over, right? Because I'm sitting here and I'm almost laughing at myself, because Mitch will understand this. I almost feel like a goddamn old timer in AA, right? I'm sitting here like I don't know about this.
Yeah, and it makes it difficult for people who are on methadone, my dog's gonna bark again, to go into AA and NA meetings, and that's really hard for them. One moment, please.
Well, I know, hopefully she can hear us, but I was just going to say real quick, for me, all that's ringing true to me is like, when I went to rehab, I was given a packet of, a pack of cigarettes, and I've used nicotine throughout my recovery to presently. And so, I can relate to like having a sort of a lesser addictive substance that you continue to use as you're trying to wean off whatever the main one was. So I can relate to it, at least in that respect, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, you know, maybe it's not the end all be all for everyone, but for someone it is.
Right.
And like, who are we to argue, you know, what's going to get someone sober and what's going to work for them and what's not. And, you know, obviously you want to listen to people who've done it and been through it, but you know, it's proven to save people. And, you know, you can still overdose for sure when you're on methadone. I mean, when you first get on methadone, you're at a really high risk of overdose because we're adding opiate to the opiate that's already being used. But I just think that for the people that it works for and for the people who work the program, it works.
What?
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchie.
I'm also super curious to wonder, like, so you're meeting with these individuals, like some multiple times a week.
Mm-hmm.
Take us into the room and like what they're saying.
Also depends. It's funny. I had a professor who every single question that you would ask her, she would always answer with, it depends. And I feel like that's what I'm doing because it's so true. Like it depends. The way that I have grown to be the therapist that I am, you know, there's different theories, there's different techniques and whatnot. And for me, the relationship is what's really important. You know, for people who haven't always felt the best about themselves or haven't felt the best about their relationships with others and question their self-esteem and have trauma and all these things that people have. I think if I can model with them a healthy relationship where they can be vulnerable and it's safe and they can learn how to process an argument, you know, like I'll have clients that, you know, we disagree on something and it becomes an issue and they want to run away and they want to get a new counselor. And I say, like, what a great opportunity to practice figuring it out, you know? So like the way that I do things is all in the relationship. You know, I talk to my clients all the time about just unconditional support. You know, I might not love your decisions and I'm probably going to tell you that, but I'm going to support you no matter what, because you need to know that there's someone here that's going to listen to you and that is going to be here no matter what. You can push me away, you can scream at me, like whatever you want. I'm still here and I'm still going to be here no matter what. And I think, you know, I form very close relationships with my clients because of that. And I think it's, you know, I'm, as you both know, taking a new job, and part of my work right now is terminating the relationship. And so I'm practicing goodbyes with people and people who had really bad goodbyes before. So that's the relationship is really just what I do and how I form my therapy. It's all about, I'm a person, you're a person. Let's talk and I care about you no matter what you tell me.
That sounds like something that I would need in early recovery. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And you know, forever really, but that must be really hard doing the terminating those. And we talked about it a little bit. And I mentioned there was a guy in a meeting that I go to that couldn't pay for his counselor anymore. And that was, he and her had to sit down and talk about it. And he said it crushed him, like, because you build those bonds. And a lot of people in addiction, Andrew and I have talked about this, it's a big isolation disease. And so once you finally do open up to someone, whether that's your counselor or a sponsor or a family member in that way, and start to build that, I can imagine that could be really hard, that transition.
Yeah. I have 30 people on my caseload and a lot of them are hurting right now. And that hurts me. But I'm using this and trying to get them to see that it's an opportunity to say goodbye when a relationship, there wasn't a catastrophic negative thing that happened that ended it. And to what I tell each of them is, I'm here, I'm supporting you, I'm listening to you no matter what. And I'm not the one doing the work. You're out there making the decisions each and every day and figuring it out and making the progress that you've made. That's not me. That's you.
That's huge.
I've taught you how to open up. I've, allowed you to be vulnerable, and you've learned that that's okay. That doesn't stop with me. That I'm a stepping stone in your therapy journey, if you will. And, a lot of them didn't think that they were going to open up to me, and they did. And they've learned how to do that, and that can be safe, and that can be helpful, and feel good. I talked to someone today about, like, let's talk about all the parts of this relationship that feel really good, because you have someone that cares about you and you care about someone. It's a professional relationship, but it's an intimate and raw and emotional one, which is gonna obviously build strong bonds. But my work right now is building these people up to realize that they're the ones that are doing the work, and they're the ones that are going to keep doing the work, and my care for them doesn't end. I'm sad too, I'm leaving, I'm still going to think about them, and vice versa. But it's really difficult.
Having been on the other side of that, I had when I was at Heron for 70 days, I worked almost every day with a therapist. And when I left, I had to terminate the relationship, right? And that's like ultimate fear for an addict, or really anyone who has told somebody things about themselves that they've never told anyone else. Insecurities, fears, traumatic experiences from childhood, the whole gambit, right? And I know too, like, on the other side of it, how, like, it's a trip, right? Because you said it's a professional relationship, but beyond that, like, initial disclaimer that yes, this is a professional relationship, it's also all of those other things. Like, it's raw, emotional, intimate. Like, it hurts a lot. And I, as an addict, right, I want any excuse to use. Like, my brain is looking for any little tiny excuse to find any chink in the armor that I can be like, well, this person did this and abandoned me, or whatever it is. And that's why, like, hearing you say what you're doing as like an exit strategy with your clients is so important to me. Like, it's so beautiful to me, because I think you recognize that, like, the danger that is inherent, like, in this change in relationship, and like, how important it is for these people who are extremely vulnerable right now to, like, know that this is not the end of their progress, right? Like, addicts are not used to having clean breaks in relationship. Like, it's fucking messy when things end in any in my experience, at least. So having something end, like, cleanly and with sadness, yes, but, like, peace on both sides, and having a plan, like, it's unheard of for us. So seeing you build that, like, it gives me a little bit of hope, like, all right, like, because it's crazy too. And this is a question I want to ask. It's like, you're not, you're what in AA we might term you, and you're an earthling. Like, you're not one of us. Like, you're not an addict, you're not an alcoholic, you're an earthling. Like, And so thinking about you working, like, how does that come in? I mean, I know you understand the disease and like it's been a part of your life, right? But how does that come into play? Like working with, because sometimes I literally feel like I'm one species and the rest of people are a totally different species.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, as humans, we all experience loss, we all experience pain, we all experience grief. We all experience the same emotions. And to sit with someone who's going through something that I've never been through is one thing, but to tap into the emotion that they're experiencing is another, I think. Fear, like a client comes in and says what's going on and it's terrifying. I haven't experienced fear to that level, but I've experienced fear and I know what that's like. And I want to sit with you while you experience that. I'm lucky as a therapist because I'll say I'm lucky, but it's also very challenging that I very easily tap into someone else's emotions. And I will often end a session and be angry or be sad or whatever, and realize that I was just feeling what my client didn't know how to feel. And I'm lucky because I get to do that and I get to experience that with them. But it's challenging for me because it's obviously experiencing a lot of emotion. But for a client to see me sit in it and sit in the raw things that they're experiencing with them and not run away from it and not shy away from it and not blame them or shame them. I'm never going to be able to say like, oh yeah, that happened to me too. But I can say like, I've felt something somewhere, somehow, maybe to a lesser extent that you are feeling, and tell me what you're feeling. I want to sit here with you so you don't have to do it alone.
That's powerful. I would imagine, I mean, being a therapist, you kind of have to be able to do that, I feel like, or being a counselor. But that kind of leads into my next question directly. I wanted to ask you what you do for yourself. You said sometimes you leave those sessions and you're like feeling those emotions that had been brought up. So what do you do for yourself?
Still learning. That's probably the hardest growth edge for me. We talk about like vicarious trauma and compassion fatigue, and I've had 3 clients die since I've been at this job, and just like the emotion that comes with that is something that I still don't really know how to deal with it well. I get to leave work at work, but I still think about these people all the time, and I'm working on separating work from home, and I think that's a part of the reason that I'm leaving this job. I think I'm very close to it, and I think that there's an opportunity for me to learn how to care for myself better. So I don't know. I mean, I'm an external processor. I love to talk things through with anyone and everyone who will listen to me. And so I'll do that. But I've also learned that that's also not always helpful, because sometimes I need to just sit in it myself. So I do a lot of processing. I'm in my own therapy. I talk about my clients and my experiences with them a lot in there. Like little silly self-care things that like get you out of your head. Like, if I'm spiraling on something, like I'll do the crossword because I have to be really freaking focused to do the crossword, and I won't think about what's going on. Little things like that I found are effective, but it's still a really, really big learning process for me. And I think it is for all therapists. I think that, you know, in a helping profession, we care a lot. And it's hard to care about people that are in so much pain. I'm still learning.
It's funny. I have like somebody told this to me once. This is off topic. I'm sorry, but somebody was like, it's actually in like a Jerry sign. I don't know what it is. It's in some sort of stand up, and it's like, is there like one ultimate therapist at the top? Like, because a therapist has a therapist, who's the one giving the support at the top? Because like the chain has to end somewhere. Sorry, I'm completely off topic, but I just started thinking that when like you said you go and you talk to someone, I'm like, who does that guy talk to? I wonder.
Yeah.
And then who does, you know what I mean? I don't know. I guess everybody is in a web of therapy with each other, and that's cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of like that sponsorship web. One sponsor, my sponsor talks about how I'll bring up something and then he'll be like, oh, I went and asked my sponsor about your question. You know what I mean? Like that kind of, well, we just touched on this with like the coaching tree. I mean, it's just all kinds of any profession type thing that has any wisdom being passed down.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm learning a lot of the same things that my clients are learning too. So, you know, therapists, I feel like, you know, from the outside, it looks like I know how to cope like a freaking boss, but like I don't, and I'm learning too. And so, you know, it kind of goes back to your question of like how I sit with someone when I haven't experienced that. And it's like, I'm dealing with my mental health too. And like, I'm not getting into my own personal stuff with clients, obviously, but to be able to like truly say like, I got it. Like, I'm with you. I'm here. Like, let's figure it out together. It's all, everyone's learning the same thing, you know, and I learn a lot from them and they learn a lot from me, but there's no ultimate wisdom. I think it's all trial and error, you know?
Definitely. Where do you see mental health and addiction from the medical side going in the next like 5-10 years? Because it was explained to me when I was in rehab that like when I was in rehab in 2016, the general surgeon officially announced addiction as a disease. So that's, 6 years ago. So that's still very recent from medical standpoint. And it's also been explained to me that in terms of mental health and substance abuse treatments, it's like hundreds of years behind where our surgical levels are or where those things are at. So do you think that, I mean, there's definitely been a trend upwards, I feel like. But yeah, I wanted to hear what you thought about that.
Yeah, I don't know where it's going. I think it's going good places. Like I think that we're making progress and we will continue to. Personally, like I don't view taking an antidepressant as any different than taking blood pressure medication. Like, if you have to do something that's going to increase the quality of your life and it's healthy, it's medically sound, like why not? And I think that the more that the medical field can get on board with all of that, and like, I talk to my clients a lot about like anxiety and trauma responses. We really don't have much control over. It's your brain not functioning properly because of whatever happened and learned behaviors. And, the more that we can bring the medical field into mental health and addiction, the less shame there is. And shame is a root of a lot of suffering. And yeah,
shame is the root of a lot of suffering.
I'll just leave it at that.
Andrew, how do you feel about the shame of people in recovery as a means to continue the shadow that looms over it? Because I mean, that was a big reason for me starting PM Recovery. That was a big reason for me starting the podcast with Andrew, was that I correctly or incorrectly attributed anonymity with shame. And I understand that anonymity is more, in AA's eyes, is more attributed to humility. And I've had multiple conversations with my sponsor and others in recovery about that, and to fully understand that. But I do think that there is a, I mean, even if it's a sliver, that anonymity potentially, but I mean, and I might look back on this, me saying this in a couple months or years and be like, that was really ignorant. But I think that anonymity does lead to that shame in a certain respect.
So here's where I'm kind of on it, right? Like, we've talked about this before, and shame is the root of a lot of suffering. That's what you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think anonymity, there are a couple types of anonymity at play here in AA. Like, there's group anonymity, which is of utmost importance for any sort of recovery group. Like, what it's like therapy. It's like what we do here, what we say here stays here. Like, it's in these four walls. We don't go and spill the beans, about what Mitch was sharing in the meeting, like, to somebody else. That's not what any recovery program is about, right? And that's a beautiful anonymity. Not sharing last names, not walking up in the supermarket and being like, "Hey, Mitch, I saw you at the AA meeting last night." Like, that's basic kind of respect anonymity. Like, I'm with that. But personal anonymity, and I think this has a lot to do with what you guys are talking about with mental health and where we are progress wise with the public perception of mental health and alcoholism and addiction in this country, and maybe even broadly the world. I can't speak on that, but I know in this country that it's a shame-filled situation. And that anonymity, I think, in my own story, and I can't speak on anyone else's, but it's that harms me. That's a shadow. Like, I am an addict. It's a big part of my life. It's a daily part of my life. It's like, I don't need to speak publicly on which meeting I'm going to and who my sponsor is and this and that. Like, but for me, I need to speak on my experience as an addict to stay sober. And this podcast, like, is so important to me because Mitch is 3,000 fucking miles away, but I get to talk to him every week as a young person, as a young athlete, as a dude that went to my college, as a dude who has a different experience than me, but is sober and living in recovery. And that form of being open, like, squashing that form of anonymity has been unbelievably important in erasing and removing some of the shame that I feel for my disease, because I could be one of two ways about this, right? Like, if I'm alone, if I'm not talking to people, if I'm not doing things like this, like listening to both of you, if I'm not whatever down the line, like, if I'm not doing the right things there, like, then I am incredibly shameful about this. Like, that's the way I was brought up. Like, if you're addicted to drugs, you're weak. Like, you're a weak person. And by talking, by being open, by saying, my name is Andrew Staley, I'm an addict, I'm going to record this with my buddy, with Emily, like, with whatever, like, I find strength in that. And, on my own review, my own inventory, I have had to check myself in terms of ego. Like, I'm not Superman. Like, this isn't solving the problem of addiction in this country. But for this alcoholic, it's helping me stay sober today. And that's removing that cloud and that shroud of shame. So, I'm a firm believer of anonymity in the group, but for me, I don't want any. I want people to know what I am. Like, And that's just something that helps me stay away from that shame, that guilt, that feeling of self-hate.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that we both are fully aware that right on the other side of us not being anonymous is pride. And it's just waiting, like with like licking its lips, like, yeah, feed into that. Keep talking about that. You know what I mean? And we, as long as we're fully aware of that, this is not a show. This is not us like going on here and like trying to, there's no bullshit here, which I appreciate that you've always brought it that way. But bring it back to Emily and kind of into this do you guys have, is there a AA pamphlet in the room? Is there any talk of AA or NA or anything like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In our program, we have some recovery coaches as well. And long story short, I was hired on a grant that also hired a recovery coach. And so I work very closely with one, and I have mutual clients with her. And she does a lot of encouraging of people to go to NA and AA if they would prefer that. Like I said before, it's difficult sometimes to find a meeting where methadone is accepted. A lot of people will go and not share that they're on methadone, which I think is also a little bit of a shame piece. Like, well, if all these people don't think that I'm clean, then am I? And that's really difficult. But having the recovery coaches, we have people who are able to share, I go to this meeting, this one's really good. There's a lot of people that understand medication assisted treatment, try it out. And then, finding a meeting's like shopping around. Like, you have to find one where you jive with the people and they get you. And we have a really great opportunity to have people who are, also in it, also going through their own process of recovery, sharing what works for them. And I'm very grateful that we have that. So it is definitely a topic of conversation. And for me, I mean, that's less of what I do, but if I have clients who really like going to meetings and they tell me that they stopped going, I'm encouraging them to go back. I'm encouraging them to reach out to the recovery coach, go with her, text her, ask her when she's so it definitely, for people that are into it, I encourage them to continue doing that, because to me, like, the support system that you find there and the people that you can call is so critical. Yeah.
No, I agree. That's awesome that they have the recovery coaches in there too, because it's like that shared experience thing that like we bond with the most, which is like super needed, I feel like. For sure.
It's great to have, my client meets with me on a Monday and they meet with the recovery coach on a Tuesday, and with me, they can talk about one thing and get support in a certain way, and then talk about it with her and have a totally different viewpoint, a totally different sort of the shared experience, and being able to share things that I wouldn't understand. So it's a beautiful balance, I think.
Going back to something you said too, like, why I'm shaking my head over here is like that shame piece, like going in and having people like scoff at you and like say you don't belong or you're not sober because you're taking part in medicated assisted treatment. Like, that is like, it almost makes me embarrassed, right? As a member of these fellowships, like, we got to do better, right? And like, yeah, I'm probably going to get yelled at by my sponsor for this whole tirade of mine here, but like, it doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like, we're supposed to be the least judgmental group in the world. Like, we all come, like, my sponsor says this, like, nobody goes into AA because life is going well. Like, we're all broken. Like, and I don't know, like, Mitch asking where we see, your field going in the next 5-10 years. I hope that's a change we start to see, is less of that shame associated with being on these treatments and showing face at an NA meeting and being able to claim your seat, like without holding anything back. Because any route of recovery is the route that you need to do and is a good route. Like, if I've learned anything from talking to you and from this episode, it's that, like, that stigma is just another source of shame that we don't need in this whole arena of addiction. Like, we've all dealt with it long enough.
Yeah,
we don't need it.
I had a client a long time ago, back in my first clinical placement in the detox, share something to the extent of continuing to use drugs and the risk that poses to my life is less scary than facing everything that I've done and everything that I feel shame for. And I think that was one of the most eye-opening moments for me, because as someone not in recovery, and at the time wasn't very educated on it, the lay person is like, well, why don't they just stop? Why can't they just stop? And there's so many reasons why, but that's one that's huge. And going back to sort of how I do therapy is like, I want every single client who walks into my office to be able to tell me anything at all, the worst thing you've ever done, and I'm not going to judge you for it. And that's how you break down that shame.
It's such a fascinating and really, really complicated thing. Like you're talking about how, like, going into an NA meeting and you're on methadone treatments. It's like, I tried NA meetings a little bit and I kind of just vibed with the AA strictness a little bit more. But it's like that patient that you said, like, they'd rather continue to use than face the other things. I relate to that. You know what I mean? I've related to that in recovery. I was like, I'll continue to procrastinate my recovery as long as I don't have to face all those things. Where I wasn't using drugs and alcohol, but I was a dry alcoholic. You know what I mean? So it's like, can you get to, like, for example, even me in recovery, right? I didn't work on those things initially. Can you, and I'm not like necessarily directly asking you this, just kind of like a hypothetical, can you really get to working on those things while you're, using methadone or using some sort of substance that closely mirrors to an extent like what you were using before? It's just like, there's like that, it's just complicated to me. I feel like it's hard to I do really think it's awesome that, if you were in this program using methadone, you have to see a counselor and have groups and stuff like that. I think that's like a really important piece of that. It just feels like, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say.
I will give you an answer. There are obviously physical and psychological parts of addiction. And I think that oftentimes the physical, because it's so painful, at least this is kind of what I see with people who like first start with us, is like they can't focus on anything else because they're in so much physical pain. And they can't sit there. They can't, I can't get them in my office because they're in such physical pain. But with the methadone, being able to alleviate those withdrawal symptoms and allow their mind to sort of return back to a baseline, where they're not experiencing a high, they're not experiencing sedation, they're not experiencing really any of the things that they were experiencing when they were using illicit opiates. It's just like satisfying that place in the brain that was keeping them so sick and so in this cycle of using. And when someone's able then to sit down and get a little bit of sobriety, because I don't like to, and I don't think we should do any sort of like trauma processing or anything while someone is in active addiction. It doesn't work. It's not healthy. It's opens them up to using more. That's a whole nother story. But if methadone can get someone to have a little bit of clean time and want to do the work, then you start doing the work. I have plenty of clients on my caseload who have asked, I want to get into the stuff that keeps me in this lifestyle. I want to delve into that. And they can while on methadone, because it's not, if you're using to deal with something that's going on in your life, it's I'm experiencing this emotion and then I'm using to not deal with it. Their methadone, they're coming and getting it each morning, and they don't have it with them, like, to take it when they're stressed or whatever. And it wouldn't do that. It doesn't do that. It'll alleviate maybe some anxiety that comes from withdrawal, but they still have to learn how to cope with any of the emotions that come with stopping use. And I think it can give people the opportunity to do that, and not have the additional, like, I'm also really sick and I want to use, and that kind of, help throw them back into the use. But the work can be done while on methadone. And
But Mitch, I could see what you're saying. Like, it would be a trip for me, right? To like be working the steps, and digging in like with the sponsor, and having like that thought in the back of my head, like, oh, but like technically there's still an opiate in my system. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and I think that's like that's like an opportunity for the program or the individual, like, to evolve a little bit. Like, grow. because this is because this is not, it's not a new necessarily treatment, but it's a new like way to look at sobriety. Like, and I think it's, again, it's like you said in the beginning of this episode, like, we're working a plus minus game here. Like, if we can keep people off of heroin and fentanyl, like, we got to take that opportunity.
Yeah. But I mean, also you have to understand that like AA was like AA and the big book and all that stuff got jumped off in like the 1920s, right? Am I somewhere around there? And so like people weren't, there weren't horse tranquilizers and like these like insane levels of fentanyl. That wasn't popular there. So when you say like grow or evolve, like that, I mean, it just has to grow and evolve. And I've had these conversations with my sponsor all the time about that. But it's not like the issue, and issues are probably the wrong word, but the thing is about AA and NA and stuff, there's no central leader. And they're actually just coming out soon with the 5th edition of the book, pretty soon, I think. But there's no we have no leaders. That's kind of our thing. So in terms of like making a change, it's an interesting question, because it's not like you can just change one of the steps or change one of the traditions. And so from my perspective, I was always kind of like something growing out of AA, in a way that's like more welcoming. Or does it have to be a growth within the groups? I mean, at some point you and I are going to be the old timers in the meetings, right? So if we keep this perspective through, I would imagine that general growth of mindset, that general more welcome mindset, may grow naturally throughout like the program.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a natural growth, right? Like, there's not going to be some rule that comes out.
Yeah,
From central services isn't going to put out a publication saying, we've revised what we mean by sober.
Right.
But it's like, I think it's like you said, it's up to the individual groups, like to be open to change, like, and to want to see somebody succeed, like, and again, like in any possible way we can, like, and I mean, I think that's generally what it comes down to, like, and if we can, one of the reasons I'm so grateful that we have Emily on is like, I don't know a goddamn thing about this stuff. Like,
right. Yeah.
Like,
she's been great.
So having her be able to spread the word a little bit is been an absolute like blessing for us. Like, it's, but.
And this is a part of, obviously I have my job and I do the work with clients and the agency, and like a part of being a therapist too is being an advocate, and to talk about this and, educate people and demonstrate what I tell my clients and what I preach to them to others, so that, the next time you run into someone who's on methadone in a meeting, like you can have this perspective and talk to them. And so I'm very grateful that I got to come on here because, obviously there's a wider audience than just the two of you, but to be able to pass on this knowledge and perspective, I think is a blessing. I'm very grateful.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on. I mean, like, what you're doing is extremely, needed and will be needed. And so thank you from Andrew and I for doing that. I know both of us are kind of, I know I want to get into where you're at. We've talked about that. So I'm very happy for you, and we're very, very thankful for you for coming on and doing what you've been doing. So thank you again.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add too, like, thanks for being open, right? Being honest, sharing your own life with us. That's I mean, that takes
breaking down the shame.
Yeah,
right.
There you go.
Right? Like I got to practice what I preach too. It might look different, but it's breaking down the shame.
I love it.
That.
I love it.
All right. Well, thank you everyone that's tuned in to episode 11. We're very
double digits.
We made it to double digit? Well, I guess I'm not
we
good
did
at
that
math.
last week.
I think 10. Yeah. But yeah,
I was half asleep.
Half asleep. Yeah, that was nice. Well, one last time, thank you so much for coming on, Emily, and we look forward to posting this one on Monday. This is going to be awesome. Yeah, thank you again for everyone tuning in. We will keep coming back.
Keep coming back. Thank you, Steve-O.